Let's just jump right in. Today, in this explainer, we're taking a sweeping, highly visual journey through the chaotic, bloody, and honestly absolutely fascinating history of England. We're going to track the political upheavals, the ruthless invasions, and the violent clash of cultures that literally shaped a relatively tiny piece of land into a nation that changed the modern world.
Okay, let's dive into this. Because this right here is the ultimate question. How did a place that spent so much of its early history just getting repeatedly conquered end up projecting its own influence across the entire globe? Well, as we're about to see over the next 2,000 years of bloodshed, being constantly invaded wasn't just a weakness for England. It was actually the secret recipe that forged its identity, and the very language we're using right now.
So to understand this, we've got to go way back. Around 11,000 years ago, melting ice sheets flooded Doggerland. That was the land bridge connecting Britain to Europe, and that physically isolated the island. Fast forward, and Celtic cultures are dominating the landscape until 55 BC, when Julius Caesar lands his forces on the southern coast. He didn't stick around, but Emperor Claudius sure did in 43 AD, bringing England firmly under the boot of the Roman Empire. They built cities like London and York, put up Hadrian's Wall. But by 407 AD, the declining Roman Empire suddenly withdrew all its legions to protect the continent, and that massive sudden exit left the native Romano-British population completely vulnerable.
And you know what they say? Nature abhors a vacuum. With the Romans gone, migrating Germanic tribes from the continent, collectively known as the Anglo-Saxons, started moving in. Historians still argue if it was a violent, massive takeover or just a gradual blending, but the result? Absolutely undeniable. The Anglo-Saxons basically replaced the existing culture entirely with their own Germanic customs and pagan beliefs. The native Britons got pushed to the far west into places like Wales and Cornwall, and right there the very first seeds of the English language were planted.
Now, the Anglo-Saxons eventually converted to Christianity and split into 4 major kingdoms, but their survival was abruptly threatened by a terrifying new enemy from the sea, the Vikings. At first it was just sporadic hit-and-run raids on isolated monasteries, think Lindisfarne in 793. But by 865 AD, things got incredibly serious. The Vikings violently switched from raiding to outright systematic conquest. The great heathen army basically marched through the country step by step. First they took Northumbria, then East Anglia, then Mercia. By 874, it was basically game over for almost everyone. Only one independent Anglo-Saxon kingdom was left standing, Wessex.
The entire future of the English identity was literally hanging by a thread here. The Vikings overran Wessex, forcing its leader King Alfred to hide in the marshes. But then, in this epic last stand at the Battle of Edington in May 878, Alfred pulls off a miraculous victory. He drove the Vikings back east into an area called the Danelaw, saved his kingdom, and, yeah, definitely earned the title Alfred the Great. His successors would eventually take back those Viking lands and unite the Kingdom of England.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the date. 1066. If there is one single year in English history you have got to remember, it's this one. The sheer weight of this number is immense. This is the year that irreversibly changed the very fabric of the country. Everything the Anglo-Saxons had just spent centuries building, it was about to be turned completely upside down in a matter of months.
It all kicked off with a massive succession crisis. King Edward the Confessor dies without an heir. A powerful English nobleman, Harold Godwinson, grabs the throne. But immediately, the King of Norway and Duke William of Normandy are like, nope, that's mine. King Harold frantically marches north, defeats the Norwegians at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, but just mere weeks later, his exhausted army has to march all the way back south to face William's invasion force. It all comes to a head at the infamous Battle of Hastings in October. King Harold is killed, supposedly taking an arrow straight to the eye, and by Christmas Day, Duke William is crowned King of England.
So what does this all mean? Well, the impact of the Norman conquest literally cannot be overstated. When William ordered the Domesday Book to survey his new kingdom, the data showed something stunning. Almost the entire Anglo-Saxon nobility had been erased and replaced by Normans. They brought in French as the language of the aristocratic elite, and this permanently intertwined England with France, changing the ruling class forever and setting the stage for centuries of future conflict across the English Channel. Which perfectly transitions us into a really dark era. Plagues, peasants, and Plantagenet wars. Moving into the medieval period, England is ruled by the Plantagenet kings, who controlled an empire stretching deep into western France. But keeping hold of that power was brutal, and as we're about to see, foreign armies weren't the only threat to the nation's survival. The country was repeatedly torn apart by internal chaos, civil wars, and forces of nature that absolutely no army could fight. The sheer devastation of this time really comes down to this one massive number: 50%.
In 1348, the Black Death arrived in England on a ship from Gascony. In less than 2 years, it wiped out up to half of the entire population. Half! It's almost impossible to wrap your head around. And this wasn't just a human tragedy, it was a total socio-economic shockwave. With the workforce decimated, the surviving peasants demanded better wages, rebelled against crushing taxes, and it eventually exploded into the Peasants' Revolt of 1381.
But despite that massive loss of life, the political machine kept right on churning. King John feuding with his barons, that gave us the Magna Carta in 1215, which finally reduced absolute royal power. The grueling Hundred Years' War with France, that brought us legendary moments like Henry V's stunning victory at Agincourt in 1415. But by 1455, feuding nobles sparked a bloody 30-year civil war known as the Wars of the Roses. The bloodshed finally ended in 1485 when Henry Tudor defeated Richard III at Bosworth Field, kicking off the famous Tudor dynasty.
And speaking of the Tudors, they gave us arguably one of the most disruptive monarchs in English history, King Henry VIII. Henry's reign went completely off the rails, basically because he was desperately obsessed with getting a male heir. When the Pope refused to annul his first marriage, Henry's solution was dramatic. He just split England completely away from the Catholic Church, started his own Protestant Church of England, and unleashed a century of religious sectarianism. Oh, and along the way, he famously went through 6 different wives, divorcing, executing, or outliving them to get what he wanted.
The religious whiplash that followed was intensely violent. After Henry's young Protestant son died, his devout Catholic daughter Mary took the throne, and she was determined to reverse the Protestant Reformation at any cost. Under her oppressive rule, a shocking 280 people were burned at the stake. 280. That horrifying track record is exactly what earned her the dark nickname Bloody Mary.
But out of all that bloodshed emerged this incredible cultural reset when your half-sister, Elizabeth I, took over. Under Queen Elizabeth, England entered a true golden age. She re-established the Protestant Church with a bit more tolerance, and the country saw this massive cultural boom, giving us the timeless plays of William Shakespeare. Economically and militarily, England thrived, even pulling off a legendary defense against the seemingly invincible Spanish Armada in 1588.
When Elizabeth died childless, the Scottish House of Stuart took over, uniting the crowns of England and Scotland. But let me tell you, the 17th century was a total powder keg. From the failed gunpowder plot trying to blow up King James I in Parliament in 1605 to the absolute disaster of his son Charles I's reign, Charles refused to cooperate with Parliament, which eventually triggered a full-blown English Civil War. Parliament's forces actually won, and in a completely unprecedented move, King Charles I was executed in 1649, briefly turning England into a republic.
So the crucial point here is that this explosive tension between the Crown and Parliament had to be resolved. After the monarchy was restored, a Catholic king, James II, threatened to upend the whole system again. That led to the Glorious Revolution of 1688. James was forced to flee, and his Protestant daughter Mary and her husband William took over. And this is monumental, they had to accept the 1689 Bill of Rights. This formally recognized the authority of Parliament, permanently stripping away the absolute power of the monarch for good.
With a stable, modern nation-state finally formed, the 18th and 19th centuries saw Britain absolutely catapult onto the global stage. The 1707 Acts of Union officially created Great Britain. Fueled by the explosive innovations of the Industrial Revolution, the economy just skyrocketed. Backed by the immense might of the Royal Navy, Britain expanded into the largest global empire in the history of the world. Of course, that dominance would eventually fade in the 20th century, as the incredible financial toll of 2 world wars virtually bankrupted the nation.
And this brilliantly illustrates the real twist of our story today. While all those physical empires have risen and fallen, the DNA of those 2,000 years of brutal invasions and cultural collisions is preserved perfectly in the modern English language. The breakdown of our vocabulary is literally a map of this history. It's like a giant puzzle. We borrow from the Latin introduced by the Romans, the Germanic roots of the Anglo-Saxons, the Old Norse from the marauding Vikings, and the French forced on us by the Normans.
It's honestly incredible when you think about it. Every time we communicate, we are speaking an artifact of history, a blend of ancient warfare, forced migrations, and unbelievable resilience. We are literally speaking the legacy of the conquerors and the conquered alike. So I'll leave you with this thought. Next time you speak a sentence in English, which ancient conqueror's words are you actually using? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. And keep questioning the history behind the world we live in today.